The next panel, Pushing Narrative Boundaries in Teen Literature, will be moderated by Vicky Smith. Vicky Smith is the Children and Teens Editor of Kirkus Reviews, a position she has held since 2008. Prior to that, she was a children's librarian in Bedford, Maine, and Memphis, Tennessee, an adjunct instructor at the Center for the Study of Children's Literature at Simmons College in Boston. She has served on the Boston Globe Hornbook, Siebert, Caldecott, and Newbery committees. With her panelists, Tim Wynne-Jones, Beth Kephart, and Daniel José Older, she will touch on numerous themes: sources of creativity, teens' relationships with their families, their histories, questions of theft and appropriation, voice, narrative, mode, and diversity, as well as the future of the industry.
I need to go study now.
It's all in there.
This is for 3 hours, right?
Cynthia said, just tell me some of the themes that you think you'll be touching on, so I wrote down a bunch of themes. And embodying all of these themes, to my immediate left is Daniel José Older. Who spent 10 years as an EMT in Brooklyn before turning to music and writing. He writes urban fantasy. His Bone Street Rumba series is an urban fantasy series for adults, and its first volume, Half Resurrection Blues, published this past January. And his debut for teens, Shadowshaper, was a finalist for the 2015 Kirkus Reviews. To his left is Beth Kephart. She teaches at Penn at the University of Pennsylvania. She is the recipient of a Pew Fellowship and an NEA grant. She's been an NBA finalist. She has written many books for both adults and children. Among her books for adults are many memoirs and books of nonfiction, and also a book on how to write memoir. And among her books for teens are House of Dance, Small Damages, and the book that she'll be reading from in a few moments, One Thing Stolen, which published this past spring. And to her left is Tim Wynne-Jones, who's on the faculty of the Vermont College, oh my God.
Oh, Fine Arts.
Fine Arts. I wrote VCFA, and all of a sudden I blanked on the FA. Thank you. This is what happens when you moderate after lunch. He's won the Governor General's Award, the Boston Globe Hornbook Award, an Edgar Award, and he's an officer of the Order of Canada. I want to know more about that.
Yeah, I got a suit.
Do you get a scepter or something? Among his middle grade books are the Rex Zero trilogy, and among his books for teens are Thief in the House of Memory, Blink and Caution, the book that it's just published, right? Just like weeks ago, Emperor of Anyplace, and he also has written songs for Fraggle Brock.
He has a beautiful wife.
Because although you are sure to want to read all of these books by the end of this panel, it's possible that not everybody in the room has read all of these books at this point. And so I wanted the authors to start off with brief readings from each of their books, because one of the ways that each of them pushes narrative boundary is in the creation of distinct and memorable voices, and I would like you to hear them from them. You ready, Daniel?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm going to do something that I hate when other writers do, but it's a little bit interactive. So when I raise my hand, I just want you all to go, "Ooh." Can you do it? Practice. But prettier. Okay, that was good. That'll work. So we're just gonna do it from the middle right now. Sierra Santiago is a muralist. She finds out that there's this magical power running through her family, where she can actually bring the drawings that she makes to life by putting spirits into them. And this hot Haitian dude, there's always a hot Haitian dude somewhere, right? He's already a Shadowshaper, and so he's helping her learn in Prospect Park, as one does. So they have a romantic moment, And then he's like, all right, now we have to learn combat shadow shaping, and he just runs off into the woods. And she's like, this mother. So she sketches out 2 chalk eyeballs and then puts spirits in them and sends them out into the woods, and they go looking for him, and then she goes in after them. Sierra had never known such total darkness. She put her hands forward and moved quickly between the trees, trying to ignore her thundering heartbeat. A flash of green glinted across a tree stump a few feet ahead, and she made her way toward it. I'm seriously going to have a talk with Robbie when I find him, she growled. Seriously. When Sierra first heard the humming, it wasn't because it had just started then. It sounded as though it had been going on for a while. It was like when she'd be sitting in class for 45 minutes and finally get so bored she'd notice the stupid heater had been clacking and smashing away the whole time. The voices grew around her in a cloud of sound. It sounded like the choir at Benny's church, both beautiful and haunting. The voices ranged from low and mournful to high and exultant. They blended together in rising and falling harmonies that filled the night. Sierra stopped walking and glanced to either side, but the forest darkness was unyielding. She wanted to yell out, "Who's there?" But that was too much like what the chicks in horror movies did right before they got ate. So she kept quiet and stayed perfectly still as the hum rose and fell in harmonious waves. Harmonious. It was too late to turn back. The noise was all around her, seemed to well up from inside of her. Nice, Sierra said. Got myself lured out here to this stupid forest. She took a step back toward where she hoped the wide open field was. In the middle of this stupid situation, another step. The humming kept getting louder. After this stupid week full of stupid weirdo things happening, she couldn't take it anymore. The drone seemed to be covering her, bursting through her. Sierra ran. She didn't care about what she might run into or what direction she was going. All she wanted was to get away from that noise, but the sound kept with her, burned incessantly through her ears, trailed her like a stalker around every turn. Branches slapped against her face and arms, biting into her skin. She saw a log up ahead, planted 1 foot hard on the ground, and threw her body into the air. It was only after she'd sailed over the log and landed several feet past it that she realized something was different. First of all, she had seen the log lying there right across the path. It wasn't just that her eyes were adjusting to the darkness, she could see everything around her in crisp detail. And then there was the jump. She'd been airborne for 5 or 6 seconds easily. She had basically glided along until she felt ready to land. For a flickering moment, Sierra saw herself as if from above, bounding through the forest in long strides, nailing each leap. It was terrific and terrifying at the same time, like she was some kind of superhero. And then she was back, without having lost a step. She hadn't escaped the voices. In fact, they were louder, and now she could make out dark shapes moving along the edge of her vision. She turned, her suddenly spectacular eyesight capturing every nook and nub of each tree, and she realized that there were indeed tall shadows rushing along on either side of her. They emitted a slight pulsing glow, a single illuminated heart beating through each one. A jolt of terror coursed from her throat to her stomach and sent tremors up and down her arms and legs. The humming, once a deep baritone, was becoming higher pitched. Thank you.
There are no sound effects. Sit back.
What are you trying to say?
I loved it, Daniel. I'm going to be reading from early pages in a book called One Thing Stolen. Nadia's in Florence. Something's wrong with Nadia. She knows it. She can't articulate what it is. And we're going to see how it feels to be inside that mind over these few pages. This is Nadia speaking. Night is gone. Dad is near, calling me from the other side of the door, where he cannot see the splinters in my hands, the threads on this bed, the spill of glitter, the artifacts of theory, the one fine thing I've made out of the muck I am. Dad doesn't know the secrets I keep, and besides, how can I tell him? Nadia, Dad says, honey, please. There's hardly any light out there in Santa Croce, only the thinnest streak of pink breaking the purple black of sky. It's too early for anything and too late to have never gone to sleep, and I am Dad's firstborn, his primo student, the one who always listened best to the stories that he tells, Nadia Kara, the professor's daughter. But now when Dad calls to me, my thoughts break into 1,000 scattering pieces, and I can't be who he thinks I am, and that doesn't mean that I'm not sorry. I am very, very sorry, Nadia. I climb out of the bunk, change, hide what I can. I stand near the open window and breathe, remembering a long time ago in Philadelphia when I was maybe 9 or 10 and Jack was 7 or 8 and Mom and Dad were saying, wake up. It was the middle of the night. My eyes were full of sleep. Dad had my hand and Mom had Jack's hand, and they were saying, "You'll see it, it's worth it." They led us down the stairs, out onto the porch, into the street. They wrapped us in blankets. They said, "Open your eyes." And we opened our eyes, and we saw them, missiles of white, missiles of pink, meteorite sky. We blinked, they vanished. Nadia? I open the door, lock it behind me. I see Dad down the hall, pacing like a big bear, unhibernating. He walks as if one leg is shorter than the other, as if there's more weight on his heart side, as if he can get the sleep out of his head by combing his hand through his hair. He stops when he sees me. He smiles. "There you are," he says. "Morning," he says. "After you," he says. I say nothing. The door to the apartment clicks shut behind us. The stairwell lamp blinks on. We round the thick stairs down, past the smell of cigarettes, toward the Vespas and bikes that sit beneath the mailboxes of the building's first floor. Dad opens the door, and the air of early morning Florence hits us. The sounds of the microscopic trash trucks and the laundromat suds down the way, and the breakfast prep cooks at the restaurant drinking their coffee on the street. Toward the piazza we go, past the white cutout face of Santa Croce, toward the river and over the bridge, Dad wearing his Professor trench and me in my sweater, my fingertip pulsing like a heartbeat. In the low river near the dam, the egrets gather, white strikes against blue. On the bridge, a pigeon flutters. The pink sky is fatter now. The birds are awake, and I remember something Dad read to me once about the flooded River Arno, how when it filled with broken things, trees, bridges, mirrors, paintings, wagons, houses, it sounded like it had been nested over by a giant flock of herons. My mind is a nest built by herons. My thoughts are broken things.
I'm going to read just a couple of little excerpts from The Emperor of Anyplace. There's a story, and then there's a story within the story, and I guess the protagonist of the novel is Evan, whose father has just died very suddenly and surprisingly. His father, who he loved a lot, and his grandfather is going to be showing up, who his father thinks is a murderer. So he's going through some stuff. So I'll read just a little bit of this just to give a sense of who he is. Evan looks out the window at the garden in the rain. He's standing over the kitchen sink eating a casserole that Mrs. Cope from up the street brought over. Rachel Cope was... Start again, Ev. Rachel Cope was his father's gardening buddy. Dad called her his pusher lady, dropping by with bulbs and cuttings and things in plain brown bags. Evan wondered once whether there was something between them. "Nah," said his dad, "just bulbs." She'd offered to help Evan out with the flower beds. Was he supposed to phone her about that, or would she just come? Looking out the window now at the drenched greenery, Evan isn't sure which are flowers and which are weeds. He's not sure what he's supposed to do about annuals and perennials, except that with perennials you probably have to do more of it. He isn't sure what to do about the lawn. Mow it, probably, or get a goat. He isn't sure about this casserole either. Eating it cold right out of the dish probably isn't helping. It's got hamburger in it and a tomato base. That much he can identify. But there are other textures, other flavors, some alien vegetable, strange spices. He stops, stares at it. Other people's food is weird. He's got a freezer full of other people's food, casseroles, soups, and stews. He's grateful, but one of these days he's just going to have to make something he recognizes. His father had been building a fish pond in the back. He can see it from the window. There's just a hole in a pile of topsoil sitting on a black tarp. There's a rubber liner, folded and waiting, the rain beading on its matte black surface. A delivery of paving stones arrived only yesterday, all paid for. What do you say to the delivery men? Nothing. You sign the sheet where the guy says, and you've got yourself 40 square feet of polished granite. He wonders if he should finish the fish pond. The hole and the pile of dirt have been his excuse for not mowing the lawn. How long can he put it off? He doesn't have anything else to do. Then he wonders if he should just shovel all the earth back into the hole. There's a pool of muddy water at the bottom of it, like an empty grave. Maybe he could put his father's ashes there. Right now they're sitting in the box. The box is sitting on the kitchen counter, where he left it when he came back from the funeral parlor. The box is a plain brown sturdy plastic container, too fat for a cereal box, too short to be a laundry detergent, a box that should in no way be sitting on the kitchen counter. Dave, a friend of his father's, helped organize the cremation, the funeral. Evan shared a checking account with his father that he used for household expenses, groceries, random bills, and whatnot. This was clearly the whatnot he could never have seen coming. Anyway, there was money for now. As for the big picture, well, that remained to be seen. He was pretty sure everything was his, the house, the car, the savings. He didn't think his father had some secret lover who would suddenly come out of the woodwork and cause trouble. There wouldn't be a charity he'd signed all his money over to, the Ship in a Bottle Foundation. At least he didn't expect so. His mother was long gone. He thought of all those stories of people sitting in a lawyer's office and learning the horrible truth that they'd been cut out of the will. He really didn't expect anything like that. Dad wasn't one for mysteries. If there was one thing he knew, it was that his father loved him more than anyone or anything else. That was pretty amazing. And it wasn't making any of this easier. So there was money, apparently. How to get at it was another thing. He needed help. He was over 16, an adult. Whoa! That came as a surprise. Driving the car was one thing. Settling an estate was something else. If you were from my homeland, you'd be a ward of the state. This nugget of information came from Olivia Schleifer. Olivia, who walked her Siamese cat on a leash. Anyplace's resident steampunker. Where are you from? Evan asked. A Dickens novel? No, she said, as if his question had been serious. Switzerland. It was at the brunch after the memorial service. When he first saw her arrive at the chapel, he almost cried at the thoughtfulness of her showing up, even if she was in a studded black leather jerkin, white crinoline, and black aviator boots. She had an ancient black aviator cap on her head, too. She looked like an Oreo. Then she came over to talk to him, and soon enough he really was on the verge of crying or screaming. You're not an adult until you turn 18 in Switzerland, she said. Well, good for them, he said. I'm an adult here. Children's Aid won't take me. He threw out his hands like, what's a guy supposed to do, move to Switzerland? So you're an orphan, she said, with a gleam in her eye that suggested the idea seemed attractive, if only in a steampunk kind of way. He could correct her on the orphan thing. Technically, there was a mother somewhere, in England, last he'd heard, but no, he had no proof of that. I guess so. She nodded and smiled, as if they were sharing a very special secret. So that's a bit of Evan. And then the other speaker is Isamu Oshuro, who has escaped the invasion of Tinian by the American Marines. And he's floated away on a raft to an island that has some rather strange inhabitants on it. I'll just read a very little bit of this. This is from his memoir. Before nightfall, I had explored the eastern side of the island and found no signs of human habitation other than the detritus on the beach. The jungle was dense enough that there might well be people at the heart of it, but I did not see the smoke of fires, nor, as it darkened, the lights of any settlement or camp. I would explore the island in time, for there was nothing else for me to do, and I would have to make myself some kind of a shelter. How long would I be here? I could not say. But by the end of that first day, I was in no hurry to go anywhere. Somehow I knew I would have to try to find my way back to Saipan, back to you, Hisako, and to our tiny set of rooms, if indeed there is anything of it left. But I wanted to be whole again first. I wanted to heal. There was so much healing to do. At sunset, I climbed a grassy hill at the northern end of the island, a hill high enough that I could see the whole island with its white beaches and green heart. And from there, I perceived that it was, yes, heart-shaped. Gazing down at the place where the western and eastern shores curved up and around and then back down until they met in a deep cleft, I suddenly remembered a favorite book of my grandfather's, Kokoro by Soseki Natsumi. I love reading, as well you know, and it was only because of Oshi-san. I have told you about him, how we talked, or Oshi-san talked, and I sat at the old man's feet listening. And at least when I was younger, I listened. When I still knew how to sit still and be obedient, before I reached the age where I was in such a hurry to do things my own way. I sat now on my heart-shaped island, cross-legged, and thought of him. A book called Heart. Ah, said my grandfather, there are shades of meaning. It could refer to the heart of things, or feelings. I remember how he patted my chest gently where my heart was. It can mean heart and mind, many things. I remember frowning, shaking my head at this. What was the use of a word that meant many things? When you said carburetor, it meant carburetor. When you said piston, that's what you were talking about. Even as a small boy, I was wild about automobiles and motorbikes, anything that roared and belched smoke. I remember Oshi-san smiling at me kindly. If only life worked as simply as an automobile. In books, things can mean more than one thing, and that makes you work at the meaning. I stood and looked out at my new home. In honor of my Oshi-san, and in honor of things not being as simple as automobiles, I called the island Kokorojima. I'll stop there.
So now that everybody's had a chance to hear some of these voices, I wanted to know how each of you developed those very distinct voices. And you've all got different narrative modes, and Tim, you've got actually 3 pieces of writing in your book. You've got the third-person story of Evan, and you've got the book within a book, which has the writings by Oshiro, and also annotations and sometimes entire chapters by a different character. Yeah. And Beth, you've got 3 characters and 3 very different narrative modes. Daniel, you've got a third-person omniscient narrator, but you also you put voice into you mix standard English with vernacular, and then your characters have this very distinctive way of speaking. I'd love to hear all of you talk about how you came up with your voices.
Sure.
Does he have to make sounds?
Yeah. Okay, so here's how it's going to go. Thank you. No, it's a great question, and we had really interesting conversations about that. I think voice is fascinating. I always tell students, the moment you find your voice is really, as a writer, one of those really pivotal turning points in your trajectory. For Sierra, this whole book kind of came out of that basic human question: what would happen if Harry Potter met the Wire? And we all walk around wondering, I think, at all times. So I was thinking along those lines. I wanted something magical and something very honest about the city and about Brooklyn and about being a person of color in Brooklyn and specifically being a woman of color in Brooklyn. So a lot of the challenge was to be honest about that in my world building and to think deeply about those different things and not preach, and not make a book that was just about that, but was still fun and magical. So the voice had to match that. And one of the early editorial notes from Cheryl Klein, who's an amazing editor, but one of these great conversations that we had in the course of it, I feel like it was taking a master class in YA working with her. But she was like, the narrative voice will swing back and forth, not Sierra's voice, the narrator voice, third person, will at times be very eloquent and graceful and this like sort of high writing, and then at other times will just be like, oh yeah, he's this Cuban cat from around the way. And I was like, yes, it does do that. That's on purpose. And she was like, well, that's going to be read as inconsistent, by different people. And I was like, that's fine, because that's how we talk. And there's a truth to that I felt was really important, to be not just in Sierra's voice, because I think we sort of allow vernacular voice to happen as long as it's like in a character, you know what I mean? And then there's this idea which reinforces this idea that there's actually this one standard way of speaking, which is quote-unquote proper English, which is very Eurocentric white English. When the reality is that code switching is a very fluid and natural process that happens with people of color and with other folks too, in a lot of different ways. And the truth is, how we tell stories is that we do switch back and forth, not always on purpose or for a reason, but just because that's the way we'll talk. So I took as much inspiration from reading other YA and reading non-YA and lots of reading. I love books, and from folks on the corner. And as a paramedic, paramedics tell stories like nobody else. And it'll be about some gruesome shit, and you'll be laughing, and you'll be like, oh, this feels wrong. That's the power of storytelling right there, and that's a powerful thing. So I took notes in my head, as we would all be around on the bus, just talking trash about what our day had been. So all that, I think, is really in there.
My character, Nadia, has a condition rare, known as frontotemporal dementia, primary progressive aphasia. And some of the characteristics of that is a slow losing of language and also a strange obsession with the making of art, an art that was never of interest to the character, the person before. And so one of my great challenges was how to tell a story with a character, first person, with a character who's losing language. And it was a tremendous challenge, but why did I feel that it was a necessary challenge? Perhaps because I watched my mother in the final days of her life. Actually, I've never told this story, but in the final days of her life after she had a stroke, and I watched within a very short, perhaps 12-hour period of time, her lose language. My mother and I had had a beautiful but fraught relationship, and the final things that she was trying to tell me is, I love you. And that the space between her words and what she was trying to tell me became something I was obsessed with Nadia. But ultimately, Nadia's disease is progressing, and she cannot tell her story anymore. She knows what is happening in some ways, but she can no longer speak. And I was at the gym one day because I thought, how can I tell this complete story? And I realized that she needed her best friend, Maggie Ercolani, to come from Philadelphia and to be there with her and to observe it. And there is a third character. What I want to say, two more things. There are two characters in this book. I do teach at Penn that are named for my students. Maggie Ercolani was a student of mine, and with her permission, of course, I use her name for the whole character. She had a stroke during her first day going to work at an internship and lost language. And so I gave Maggie's spirit to my character, Maggie Ercolani, and Maggie's doing great. And then there is a key character, a doctor in this story, who Catherine Goldrath is based on one of my students, Katie Goldrath, who wanted desperately to become a doctor and has found a way to do that. And I know what her dreams felt like and how she talked about them. I have to attach every character I have to either a piece of my own heart and soul or somebody I love, and I love my students and they give me a lot of inspiration.
That's really this was a really hard book for me to write. It took longer than usual, 3.5 years. And at one point it was 600 pages, and there were 13 point of view characters. And my very brilliant editor, Liz Bicknell, at Candlewick, thank you for reminding me. That's the effervescent Rita, always helpful. Liz did me the favor of, when I sent her the 600-page manuscript, of not reading it. She read a few pages, and at one point she said, "Oh, this is exciting, they're in Iceland now." That was the last email I had from her. From what I knew that she wasn't dead, because there were things on Facebook. So after 5 months of that, now we've got 2 books together and we've got along fantastically. After about 5 months of that, I said, "Don't read it, okay?" Which was just, trying to gain back some of my dignity, yeah. And I said, I'm going to rewrite it and get rid of some of those voices and maybe a lot of those pages, which I did. And the interesting thing for me is that the voice of the Japanese soldier, Isamu Shiro, came to me right from the beginning, and I wrote almost his entire story. The book that is called Korojima, after the island. I wrote that, and it didn't change much. But how to get to that island, how to get the other people to that island who were going to be, and then of course the really important, the most important person in it, Evan, who I read a bit of, his voice took the longest to come, because I don't even know why. I was all over the map. It was like I was learning how to write again. I mean, I wrote a lot of that 600 pages were sort of novellas of how the other characters became who they were, which is like starting from scratch or something. And once I knew the characters, I could throw out those stories. So it was a really, I haven't really answered your question, but that's all I'm going to say.
Okay. Now, each of your books, even though they're not all about magic, I think have this element of the uncanny, if you will. Nadia's condition, especially for readers who don't discover what the condition is until quite a ways through the book, but it feels a lot more magical than science-based. And Tim, you've got this island that has a couple of varieties of ghost on it, but you're also, the book within the book is prefaced by a note that the narrator has spent, before he starts writing, he has spent several days wounded, exhausted, without food, and so you call his reportage into question at the beginning of his story. And Daniel, yours is explicitly a fantasy. But since there is this magical theme that's running through your books, I'd like to know how you, at what point in your writing of your story you decided it was going to have this element, how you folded it in, how you decided you were going to make the reveal to readers, or whether you decided to make a reveal to readers. Tim, do you want to start?
I've never written fantasy before. I read fantasy sometimes, and I like it. But I've had this obsession with what an island can be, you know. And on an island, anything can happen, especially if you escape from a war-torn island, half dead on a raft. Where are you going to end up? And I actually didn't know if he was alive or dead when I was writing it, so it was really easy to make it to make those fantastical characters on the island. And as I wrote, I realized that I was writing about what war was, and he lives in peace on this island until an American soldier crash lands on the island, and then because they're there, the two of them, there has to be war again, except they handle it in a different way. Where was I going? I'm kind of losing my mind. What's that disease? Yes. So did I try to talk like her in the book?
Stop. He's really not doing the book justice at all.
No, I sure not. It's fantastic. It's brilliant. One thing that really I wanted to say, though, here is Mariana Baird, who's sitting right there, wrote an amazing critical thesis when she was at Vermont College about that incredible thing you can do where you suspend, where a reader who doesn't really believe in magic can believe in it because they can call it this. Whereas those who want to believe it, I'm not doing you justice, Mariana, but it was an amazing, by the island, you can read the island as a construct, but I hope I've got enough good flora and fauna on it that it sounds real too. And so that I'm really, that idea of writing where you can, you don't have to suspend your disbelief if you want to just read it all as metaphor. But I had to be on that island, and it had to be real for me, and I hope it's real for other readers too.
It all works beautifully in your book. I think the writing process is a fantastical process, no matter what you're working on. And in this case, Nadia has obsessions. Writers have obsessions. I certainly do. And many of my books have birds in them. And Nadia is obsessed with building nests out of things that she's stolen, sort of this symbology of home. I understood all of that. I understood the obsession with birds. I understood this fantastical place where your mind goes, you know. And I also understood, because sometimes I lose names and I lose ideas, what it would be like to be in that quasi-space of losing and spiraling away from yourself. So the answer to the question about magic, Vicky, I think is for me, I have to experience the same obsession and the same passion in order to go into a fantastical place. And once I'm there, it's profoundly real. And I attach words to the real.
So I've always been a nerd and a dork.
And it's so cute.
And I was a cute nerd. Yes, still.
That's an oxymoron, is it not?
I'm just a nerd that goes to the gym. But anyway, side note. So I don't even know. Fantasy, yes. So yeah, I grew up loving Star Wars and the Lord of the Rings and all this other good stuff. And there comes a moment for, most people of color when we wake up and realize that we're the bad guys in all the stories we love, which is devastating on all these levels. And then the question becomes, how do you love a genre that doesn't love you back, or sometimes actively hates you and, seeks your destruction? So understanding that pushed me far away from the genre, and then eventually I swung back like all good nerds do, but it sort of with the idea of a counter-narrative firmly entrenched in my mind. How do we love and then fight within a genre that doesn't love us back? So that was a lot of what I was asking myself. I was an organizer, a community organizer in Bushwick, doing work on gentrification, domestic violence, racism, other stuff. And I wanted literature that could speak to that and not be preachy, and but also have, dragons and ghosts and monsters and stuff. When I was a kid, I really wanted to work in George Lucas's monster shop. That was like one of my dream jobs. And I felt like, can all those things be in one place together? And it wasn't until I read Octavia Butler that I really realized they could all be in the same place together. Shout out to Octavia Butler for that. That's why Sierra goes to Octavia Butler High School in the book. Because she's, a saint, basically, for that. She's like a patron saint of speculative fiction writers who want to tell some difficult truths and write counter-narratives and talk about power and race and gender in a complicated way. She did that shit. So I read that, and I just read all her books, which I don't usually do, and that was certainly like a guiding light along the way. And then the question was also like, what does it really mean to have a counter-narrative? What are different cultural ways of approaching science fiction that we haven't seen yet or enough of yet? Including, especially, I think, with the ghost story, because the idea of ghosts being like primarily and essentially just evil creatures that jump out of closets and kill you is a very white Western concept when we step back and look at the entire world, which is mostly full of people that worship our ancestors and, have much more complicated and nuanced relationships with the dead and with the past and with history. So the ghost story for me became a way of thinking about ghosts in a more nuanced way than just they'll kill you, or they're sad that they didn't get to say something to you, so now they have to kill everybody. That's boring. We've just seen that so much, and I wanted to reclaim the ghost story on some level. In my culture, we have coffee with our ancestors every morning. When I make coffee, I put some down for them. That's what we do. So that's how the characters hang out. There's a very loving relationship in some ways, and there's still scary monsters too. And I was also tired of the trope of the main character who's very milquetoast and plain and in this wild, amazing world and spends the whole book just being like, oh my God, I can't believe that. That's amazing. Like, that gets boring, you know what I mean? Okay, there's magic. Get over it, move on. Now let's have some adventure and fun. We get it. So Sierra, came up in a family that deals with ancestors and thinks about these things. Maybe not openly, and there's still a lot of ways that it gets hidden and it gets played off and called crazy and all these things. But she doesn't spend the whole book being flabbergasted. She gets into it, and that was part of what I was thinking.
You answered my next question.
Did he answer for me too?
I can. You want me to?
Just keep talking.
Because I was going to go next into the role of history in your books, and so you've touched on Sierra's complicated and not entirely smooth family history and how it affects her. But Beth and Tim, would you talk about how, regional world and personal histories interact in your books?
Mm-hmm.
Well, do you mind if I? So the character Nadia, her father is a professor, and he's researching the 1966 flooding of the Arno, which destroyed so much of the Renaissance art world. And after that extraordinary destruction of a city and really of a global art holding, all of these mud angels, which was actually the original title for this book, flocked to Florence. College students from all over, sleeping in railroad trains, whatever they were doing, to try to save the city, to drag stuff out of the muck, and to dry out the library books and to save the Christ figures and the crosses. And so Nadia's father is obsessed with trying to tell the story of when does a flood begin? And throughout the book, he's incapable of really finding a beginning for a story, while she is trying to find a way to tell them, her family, that her mind, like a city ruined by flood, is falling away. It's the twinning in this book of history, which I always write about in one way or the other, and personal truth, which I always write about. And my obsession in that twinning was a single word: effacement. Effacement of mind, effacement of city, and is there a rescue for that?
Yeah, it's really exciting. My book was, the history of it is very important because I'd always wanted to write a Second World War novel for my father, who had a bad war, which he kept mostly secret. He'd tell funny stories from the war, all those funny stories that happened in the war. He kept from us the fact that he'd opened up Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, in fact being in charge of it. And that pain, I think, resonated with him down the ages. And I think a lot of the book is about how the war doesn't end. It spirals down the ages, and then it's affecting his grandson in this book. And I couldn't, but I found it really hard to try to write a war story. And I realized that Amanda and I were spending a year in Europe and reading an awful lot of Second World War material. And I couldn't, I know that war. I've read about it all my life. My father's told me about it. And then I realized that I couldn't write his war. That was his war. And as soon as I realized that, I went, well, there's that other one, the one in the Pacific. There was mostly an American war, and I think the Australians, but it wasn't really the war I knew. In fact, I knew nothing about it. So in a way, it was kind of wonderfully clear. I just had to read all about that war, and in order to honor my father, I had to get as far away from his war as I could to a war that I could own myself, so to speak. We do pretend we're gods, when we were, no, anyway. And so it was really fabulous because suddenly all of that imagery I've grown up with all my life was put aside, and I had this fresh canvas. And that allowed me to go into a thing about Daniel's book about the fabulously fresh ghosts. I mean, it's a fabulously exciting book, and it feels new. And I found that reading Japanese mythology, I found the Jikaniki, who are flesh eaters. They're not really, I'd always wanted to write a zombie book, no, not really. But they're flesh eaters, but they only eat dead human flesh. And then I found myself, because I care about motivation, I thought, well, why? And then I began to think about that. What do the Jikaniki want? And so I got a chance to sort of play with somebody else's mythology, which I don't think is stealing from culture, but that's maybe your next question.
Well, it does come up.
Did you get an advance copy?
Daniel, you address cultural appropriation straight on. Your evil character is
A scientist, an anthropologist.
An anthropologist.
Yes.
Damned anthropologists.
Yes. Do you want me to expound? Oh, okay. Well, all right. Is that the question?
Yeah.
Well,
Let's talk about cultural appropriation.
Sure.
Well, actually, let's talk about theft, because
yeah.
theft is a theme that runs through all of these stories.
Definitely.
The cultural appropriation of the anthropologist, and the theft of Nadia's language and Nadia's cognition, and there's the intellectual property theft is one of the plot elements in Emperor of Anyplace. So, the question of story and theft is really intertwined in all of these books.
Yeah. I have a lot of different thoughts about it. I'm going to try to make sense of them. Bear with me. A lot of it comes... There's a moment when a bad guy becomes a human being in a novel, in a good novel, hopefully. where they stop being the wahaha and they turn into someone that you could sort of maybe get with if they just weren't so mean about it or whatever. So in the course of Dr. Wick not being that mad scientist that I originally wrote him as, lazily, I've thought a lot about the sort of standard go-to excuse that you'll see a lot in public spaces when someone messes up around race or gender or something and says something stupid or something racist or whatever and gets called on it. They always go, well, that wasn't my intention. I meant to, I didn't mean to offend the entire universe or erase you from existence. And it sort of doesn't matter to the people that get erased, and that's what the conversation never gets to that point, I think. But when we're writing characters that do damage, I think, we have to figure out what's their motivation. So if they weren't trying to hurt everybody, what were they trying to do? And so with Wick, it was a lot of question of, where is he coming from? What is he really trying to do? He really believes that he's saving the Shadowshapers, which is this spiritual community in Brooklyn, because they're in trouble. And part of the reason they're in trouble is because of this patriarchal legacy and not including women and all these problematic things they do. So he feels like he can come in and, bring his version of whatever makes sense and his other forms of power that he's also kind of thefted from different communities and all these things. Which, on the one hand, I think made him sort of an important conversation piece and also gave him a complicated kind of humanity that we see a lot, but don't see deconstructed a lot in literature, especially children's literature. And I think that's really where I wanted to have the conversation, in that we tend to give a pass to the softer humanities and social sciences and anthropology and gloss over that they've been involved in some of the most devastating facets of human history and genocide and all these other things. And there's a great danger in it. So for all the time that we spend upping the written word and the power of literature and storytelling, we have to understand that to be a two-sided sword. When we say the pen is mightier than the sword, there's a great power of destruction that has often happened in research and in performance of the other and all these things that is devastating to communities when it's done without the thoughtfulness that it really requires to be done with humanity. And there's no easy answer to how to do that well, right? It's certainly not about answers so much as asking questions and being honest about this troubled past of anthropology, of whiteness entering into spaces of color and all different analogies of that. So Wick was my way of thinking, trying to think deeply and complicate that idea of the good anthropologist that wants to save the community.
So theft, for me, what is disease but theft, right? It takes away part of who you were, part of what you believed you had in your future. And so Nadia is a victim of theft in this book, but she is also a thief. As I mentioned, she's going around and she's stealing beautiful things that can make extraordinary museum-worthy nests, but she's hiding them. She's embarrassed. She knows that they've come from a wrong place. She knows she can't understand them, or explain them, I should say. So while she is being thieved from, she is thieving. And the nest metaphor is what she's building is this idea of home. I have to. If I am changing, if I am suddenly slipping away from myself, can I build a safe environment through these nests? And as her condition deteriorates, Maggie and her brother Jack and her mother and father and this wonderful Catherine Goldrath, the older former mud angel who becomes her doctor there in Florence, they are also community. They are what stands up around her. So she builds the nests for her own sanctity of mind, and they stand around her as nest. And there is this going back and forth between what gets stolen and how stealing saves.
There's stealing things. There's this story, the Kokorojima, the story of Isamu story from the island. Some people want to make into a blockbuster movie, and the soldier was stopping them, and nobody can figure out why. And it's because there's a story, and they feel they know what happened on that island, and this story, and his Evan's grandfather, this dyed-in-the-wool Marine who was crusty and who Evan is quite sure is perhaps a murderer, won't tell his side of the story. The Kokodojima suggests very strongly that he ended up committing a murder, and Evan is pleading with him, just tell us what actually happened, and he won't. He refuses to, and it requires Evan to figure it out, because. And I don't want to talk about too much because I don't want to give it away, but it's really important for him. It's like nobody can believe this story. It's not believable. And until somebody makes the extra step to go beyond what is believable and accept the idea that something far more extraordinary happened, that he can be convinced, the grandfather can be convinced that he's not, in fact, insane. Although I would hesitate to say that war is insanity, and so everybody's insane when they're in that state.
Which so nicely brings me back to the beginning about pushing narrative boundaries, because each of you with each of these books really demands a lot of your readers. As a person who reads a lot of YA, each of these books really stands out because they are each in its own way incredibly. You're asking your readers to take a leap of faith, each one of you. So Daniel, you're asking your readers to take a leap of faith and believe in this magic that they've never heard of, and to accept this vernacular narration that they're not comfortable with, possibly. And Beth, you're asking readers to float along in the mind of this girl who is losing it. And Tim, you never really tell readers what they're allowed to believe at the end. You really make readers believe it on their own. So all of these books stand out, which is why you should all read them. And I have been observing, yes, I was waiting for the 5-minute hand and I didn't see it. So
That's the 5-minute hand.
yeah, that's the 5-minute hand. Actually, it's a 2-minute hand.
Okay, 2 minutes.
So I won't ask my question about the future of the industry because that could take a while, but it is encouraging that 3 such smart and brilliant writers are also teaching writing, I am glad to say. Are there questions from the audience? Yes, way up there.
There was a report that came out recently about who's purchasing and buying and also reading YA, and it's largely grown-ups. Does that impact you as authors? Like, does that affect your headspace when you're going to sit down to write your next book, knowing that you don't just have teens, maybe more grown-ups? I mean, does that affect your process and how you're thinking about the work that you do?
Can I just say that I think teens are just as smart as grown-ups, and that I've never written down. And, very, very briefly, one of my books is called Flow, The Life and Times of the Philadelphia Schuylkill River. It is a book told in first person of a real river, Philadelphia's river, from time immemorial to 2005. I won't go into it other than to say that no adult publishing house wanted this book. It was finally printed by a university press, and guess who's reading it now? The 6th graders of Philadelphia. They're the ones who get the deep lyricism, so no. It doesn't affect it, because I know I can write as smart as I want to, and there's going to be some teens out there who get it. And the people who are going to take my books down tend to be adults, not teens.
It touches really well on what Vicky was just talking about, actually, because I think we all kind of, deep down, really love books that ask us to step up and be our best selves and to challenge us, right? And I know when I'm reading a book and I have that little moment where I put 2 things together and I realize something that wasn't spoon-fed to me, I get so excited, and those are moments that I fall in love with books. Books should be friends, right? But they should be friends that will challenge you and will push you to be a better person, a better reader, a smarter human being. So I try to write with that in mind, and I think that comes down to the micro level of, how we write sentences, that we don't have to, let someone know that they walked across the room, picked up the phone, put it to their ear, all those things. Like, when you read a book that trusts you, then to make those connections, then you feel like that book kind of loves you on some way, and then you love that book back. And so whether I'm writing for adults or teens, and I write for both, I always try to keep that in mind. Like, that I'm not writing to the lowest common denominator. I'm not here to feed trolls or, make bigots comfortable. I'm here to challenge people. And some people will feel right at home in that, and some people will feel pushed a little. But my editors all tell me that they read my books, and they always have urbandictionary.com open the whole time. And what I love is that they tell me that, and they don't make changes based on that. They just learn from it, and they leave the prose alone because they know that other people will understand and not have to spend the whole time on Urban Dictionary. So I think that's a beautiful thing. That's like a model of editorial behavior that people should follow. But that's all.
And actually, the overarching answer to that question is I doubt if any of us write for an audience. I mean, I don't think about my audience when I'm writing at all. I write the story I have to write and find a way to get that down. Yeah.
And we're done, so I want to say thank you, Bank Street, for having me, and Jenny Brown for inviting me to begin with, and Vicky for your extraordinary questions. And these guys have written amazing books, and I'm really honored to be here.
Me too.